Alright, so this one is going to be a sequel-themed weekend. The choice was The Strangers finally or Truth or Dare. So it was very easy to say, we'll just keep with the sequel theme. Because we also have the straight-to-DVD release of a Deep Blue Sea sequel 19 years later, this past Tuesday, so I figured why not do that too. So, obviously we're going to start with Super Troopers 2, which is there's obviously been a long-awaited sequel to a Broken Lizard movie, whether it be this or Potfest, which still may or may not be real in the long run, which I don't know how good of an idea that is anyway. So if they were going to do one, obviously it would have to be this one. Much as I love Club Dread, but I'm one of the few. So I go into this as pretty big fans of theirs. I didn't much care for the Slam and Salmon, but Super Troopers, Club Dread, and Beer Fest are perfectly okay with me. I love them and have seen them a shitload of times and can probably quote most of them all the way through, especially Super Troopers. And they went about this in a way that you could kind of tell that, obviously, if there's one thing you can't call it, it's a cash grab, because they were like, you could tell they were like really passionate about doing this, and they did the whole Kickstarter thing, which they raised quite quickly. Like, it was, I think it's like just under Veronica Mars. It's like the most successful Kickstarter or something. Um, and it's clear that they really wanted to do right by the fans when they made this. So I was open to it, and I put my trust in them, as I'm sure many did. Just like I said, just being a fan of their work before, with, like I said, maybe the exception of the Slam and Salmon, but even that one seems to have quite a big fan base from what I've heard. So yeah, I was kind of okay going into this. I wasn't in as much fear that it was going to be like a Zoolander 2 or a Dumb and Dumber 2 or something like that. Um, I mean, there is always going to be that doubt, and there's always that possibility. And yeah, it's one of those movies where I kind of felt myself going back and forth pretty much the whole time, where it's like, yeah, this is, I think, what we all want, and the other half is like, oh yeah, now you're in Dumb and Dumber 2, Zoolander 2 territory just a little bit. So, starting with this opening, with this whole, after they got fired as cops, they're a band on a tour bus thing, which ultimately, obviously, ends up being a dream that Rabbit's having, but even so, it's like the opening of the first movie is like legendary. Like, it's like probably the most memorable scene of the entire movie, and that entire movie has all these memorable jokes in it, that have been said again and again and again for the past 16 years. The guy next to me in the theater was, overheard him saying to his friends, like, well, yeah, the first one was like 9 years ago. And it's like, I was just thinking, dude, you like way undershot it. That movie, the movie's a lot older than you think it is. I was 11 when it came out, and I remember seeing it in the smallest theater that we had, or it's the smallest number that we had, and it stayed there the whole time, and it was only out for like a week or two. Yet somehow everybody that I knew had seen it in that small time frame. Um, so now we have. Well, the thing is that I was thinking, how can we kind of get it started off? Kind of like, obviously, you don't want to repeat everything because that's the kiss of death, but it's like, if we could have something that's, I don't know if I want to say similar, but I guess similar in the way the opening of the first one built up. How it started off as one thing and just kind of kept going and going, and then ultimately ended up with them at the bar with Mac and all that other thing. And it's like, maybe they could do something like that, that builds like that, that ultimately becomes something really memorable. And then watching this bus thing play out was kind of like, sometimes I felt like it was working, and sometimes it's like, I don't know, that's before after a while it becomes very clear that it is just a dream sequence, but at the start you're not really quite sure the way they play it off. And I don't know, because the way they kept building up this one continuous joke about the reason they aren't cops anymore is because a ride along with Fred Savage went wrong. And it's like, not to say they're not building that up for something else, but throughout the whole movie, every time they brought that joke back up, the first thing I could always think of was, why isn't the Fred Savage thing just the opening? Like, would it not make perfect sense if they're not cops anymore, if the opening scene is how they get fired? That's, like, that's like structure 101, really. But it's yeah. So I don't know how I fully feel about that, but it's not like it's completely there are funny things in this opening, so I wasn't too bent out of shape about it. Especially learning that they may be using that joke for another payoff later. And I also didn't mind the. I thought the plot was a decent idea. The Canadian border where Vermont is may not be exactly where we thought it was, so there's the whole argument of jurisdiction thing. That's a really interesting setup, and the whole, feuding with the Mounties and all that stuff. The only problem is that I don't know what it is with comedy writers now and the Canadian stereotypes, but after what Kevin Smith has been doing on top, like in this shortly after, it's like for some reason these guys really find Canadian stereotypes hilarious, particularly the accents, especially if they're really overblown and over the top. And they just apparently want to base their movies around this. I don't understand why this is taking off. And of course, we saw how movies like Yoga Hosers were received. So, I don't know. I guess they really wanted to go with this angle. And I don't know. That's probably the not that it doesn't have some decent jokes in it, but just that whole setup in general is where the movie's weak spot is, and the fact that they got so hung up on that should be what the main joke of the movie is, and they're gonna keep it up the whole time, to the point that even halfway through the movie, once all of this has been established, just jokes about these guys being over the top, Canadian stereotypes are just jokes that get their own scenes, and it just really, really overplays itself when it probably wasn't the best idea to begin with. Like I said, especially how we saw how it played out in movies like Yoga Hosers. And this one doesn't really do the joke any more justice than that did. It's just there as a constant that you just kind of have to go around for the better stuff. And it does... And I guess there is something there, because you could say maybe they did this with the Germans in Beer Fest. And it's like, and it's kind of that same setup of them clashing, and then there is the whole thing about, like, when they insult, Americans, there's humor in it because maybe there's truth in it, but, from, as far as, us insulting them, it didn't have that same kind of bite to it. It just kind of felt really cheap and kind of lame, and it just didn't quite bounce off the way it probably could have. Like I said, I don't really remember hating that too much about the German stereotypes in Beer Fest, or however many other stereotypes were in that movie. I remember, it's been a while since I've seen it, but I remember Beer Fest working for the most part. And it's like, this almost felt like it had more Beer Fest in it than Super Troopers, actually. So take that for what you will. And they do have some moments with that, like, the whole sequence where it basically goes back to the main jokes that made Super Troopers work, when they impersonate the Mounties and basically go out to intentionally ruin their reputations as cops, is like, it's like a highlight reel of what this movie could have been as a whole. But it's really just kind of one scene in the middle, but it's a really great scene. Like I said, really brings back the magic of what the first movie brought in most of its jokes. And I do kind of like, at the they once again, it gets overplayed, but I did like also the moments when, like, Ramathorn's having fun with the metric system and the converting and all that. But yeah, but the thing about it though was that, and this actually might sound like a criticism in a worse movie, but the thing about the first movie was it felt like a series of, like, self-contained sketches that just work by themselves, that they just kind of did, and then after a while a plot started to form. But that really worked well with the setup of that movie. Like, really, like, made the characters their own. Also, when we saw, like, the way they would do, like, those joke scenes when they would pull the pranks or whatever, but still, like, they just really worked as individual scenes by themselves. And we just got a whole series of them feeling like one right after the other. And this one feels less. And weirdly enough, that might sound like it just feels like maybe episodic until it does something, but it actually, especially when you look at this, it has a really organized feel to it. Like we get this great joke, we get this great joke, and then this great joke sends us into the plot, and then we kind of get both as it goes. But here, it felt a lot kind of messier until we were kind of ultimately getting to this point, with a lot of running jokes. Like, I don't remember too many jokes in the first one that they like tried to use again and again, and ultimately we run into the ground. This one's like built on running jokes, which on one side, to their credit, are not jokes from the other movie, which is something obviously a lazier sequel would do. There are definitely there's probably a callback at least once to almost every joke from the first movie, but for the most part they're so fleeting. It doesn't feel like they're milking it or anything. It's just like, oh, we remember this thing, and maybe there's a slight spin on it or something, like the Sean Segar saying "glittering" and got a huge laugh in the theater I was in. I went at 11:50 this morning, and there was a shitload of people in there. It was surprising, and we were in the big theater too. And yeah, that probably helps because the crowd I was with was into it. So with comedies, that's usually going to play a big part. Like if I was watching this alone, I may not have found some of the scenes as funny as I did. But it's kind of the being able to play off of an audience and see what works with them kind of enhances it a little bit. And then you can kind of maybe see the humor in it a bit more than you would have alone. Maybe my audience was just really easy to please. It could be either one for sure. But yeah, there are some jokes in there that I feel like went over everybody's heads that I was into. Like they are when they're talking on the walkie-talkies or whatever, and they're using code names, and Brian Cox's code name is Uncle Argyle. As in his Braveheart character. So I did really like that, and I don't think anybody seemed to notice that. But, yeah, but for the most part, like I said, it's all about the running jokes that maybe won't always work. For some reason, Farva is a huge fan of puns now, and that's his thing, I guess. I don't know. I don't know if that was working all the way or not. Not that I'm completely against puns or anything, but it's like, it was like over half of Farva's character at this point, and that's just something that just did not carry over. I don't know, but I mean, that's not to say Heffernan was able to definitely like fall right back into this character for sure, but to give him that particular trait just kind of seemed like a kind of a random thing for Farva of all people to just be doing now as his shtick, but. Yeah. But there are, obviously, there's them posing as the Mounties. There's other jokes that, once again, they run into the ground, but they start off great in concept. Like when they find the drugs, and how they find a different array of drugs, but they can't identify them. So it's like, well, the only thing left to do is each one of us takes a different one, and then we'll see what the effects are, and then we'll figure out what the drugs are. And it's like, that's a really good setup. And there are funny moments that it brings on, but it doesn't feel like it goes to its full... It goes too long, yet somehow in dragging it out too long, they never find its full potential, it feels like. And then that ends up becoming a running joke with Ramathorn that goes in some interesting directions. Like I said, I could totally see it being a funny idea on paper. It's the fact that the whole movie sticks with it. So I guess you can admire, like, I guess the audacity to stick with these jokes the whole time and be that confident, but I don't know. The whole running joke thing is a risky thing to do, and the reward in that risk is maybe not as big as it might feel in the idea stage. And another thing, too, is, and I can understand this coming from this direction with the idea of doing a comedy sequel, which is, the great thing about the jokes in the first movie is that they, once again, if I'm remembering correctly, most of, if not all of them, feel very grounded. Like, all the jokes in the movie feel like things that these guys would actually do to each other. Whereas in this one, obviously, we're going to get a bit more over the top with what we're doing, and that may kind of cheapen what already worked before you were trying to take it to new heights. Um, so yeah, like I said, this definitely feels more like it has more of the feel that Beer Fest did than Super Troopers did, where it kind of went for a more over the top feel, but yeah. And then there's stuff like where it's just all in the timing. Where I saw an interview or something where Chandrasekhar was talking about the fact that due to recent events, there is a poorly timed Stephen Hawking joke in this movie. Um, but regardless of that, like it gets like its own individual guilty laugh on top of the laugh it already would have had. So there's just whether you see it as a problem or an asset, it could go either way depending on the viewer. I think given the setup of the scene, it actually works by itself. Like, it's funny enough. And then, like I said, just having that kind of guilty laugh in there, it's... Yeah, I don't think it hurt too much, but it does... I mean, if you're the kind of person that squirms at stuff like that, then you'll maybe have a problem. But I was fine with that. I just... Like I said, it kind of just worked just right in that way, so, yeah. Um, so I'm not really sure where I stand as far as like a final thought. I'd also heard a lot going in. Chandrasekhar was talking about how impressed he was with how funny Rob Lowe is, and how he thought Rob Lowe was like the funniest one in the movie. Yeah, he still just kind of stems off the whole Canadian stereotypes things, like some of his funniest lines are stuff like by Tim Horton's Ghost, stuff like that. But my favorite line of his was in his first scene when he's just, it's so casual. I'm not even sure he's on screen when he says it. It's so casual when they're going to go in the other room and talk about something, and he just says, yeah, we'll just fuck off over here and go into this room. It's just how casually he said that works. But yeah, it all felt like they really got hung up on that Canada thing, just like Kevin Smith did, and I don't get where that appeal lies with these writers. I don't. But so yeah, that brought it down because, like I said, it was so like such a running joke throughout the whole thing. But there's enough in here, and they are fit back into the characters well enough. Like Stolhansky's smile, like that kind of, unseasoned rookie kind of smile that he kind of still has on, despite the fact that he has to say many, many times throughout the movie that he's not a rookie anymore. Still, it just felt like the characters were like always in them and just came right back. And in a gap like 16 years, that's kind of a big deal. So if you're being such a big fan of the first movie, it's hard to dislike it based on that alone. But there are definitely things that, like I said, it really felt like we could have had maybe a more broad arrangement of jokes here as opposed to all the running ones we had. Like I said, maybe you don't have to go as over the top. The plot also feels significantly more half-assed in this one. I know that probably shouldn't matter in a movie like this, but I thought the first one actually handled that really well, combining the comedy with how the plot just kind of eased its way in. And then they're also kind of retreading very similar territory, so... Like, if anything, yeah, it's the plot that feels a lot more like a retread than the jokes do, so there's that. So yeah, mixed and complicated, I guess, feelings on Super Troopers 2, but yeah, like I said, I think it's really depends on how you feel about the first one. Because if you like the first one as much as I do, or love it as much as I do, like I said, if anything, it's just going to be difficult to dislike this one, but surely you'll notice that there's by no means perfection here, but yeah, and it's not always kind of seamless. There are moments where it's kind of like not just like the Farva puns thing, but it's kind of like this random thing that happens really doesn't feel like this character did. Or I can in no way see this character doing this in the first movie or something like that. But for the most part, They did carry over well, but whether those jokes always line up, I don't know. Like I said, it almost feels like it should be another Broken Lizard movie as opposed to an actual sequel to Super Troopers. But yeah, that's where I go with that before I get too repetitious. So let's go on to The Strangers Pray at Night, which obviously I've had time to hear a whole bunch of things about. Not necessarily about the movie itself, but just general thoughts people have about it. Still not quite sure what area they lie in, but I know where mine lies. So let's start with that. We have a little pointless opening where we're somewhat reintroduced to a couple of the killers. But it's the same one, the same three from the first movie. There's the dude with just the bag, there's the pinup girl, and there's Dollface. I think they just go by what their masks look like. And the family that they're terrorizing now is Martin Henderson from The Ring and Smoking Aces, Christina Hendricks, Bailey Madison, and some other dude. That's the brother. And I wasn't sure how to feel about this right off, because I kind of knew going in that Bailey Madison was going to be our kind of focal point here. And she's doing the rebellious teen thing. Like, that's what sets the whole plot off, is the rebellious teen thing. And it's like I was talking about with Caitlin Deaver in Outside In, when it's like, yeah, they can acknowledge this is just what teenagers do and all that, and if characters seem stereotyped, it's like, well, in this particular case, maybe they're the more stereotyped, the more realistic it actually ends up being. Well, I don't know. You've got the band t-shirts, you've got the holes in the jeans, you've got the shirt around the waist, you've got the smoking, and you've got the talking about her problems in breathy, dramatic tones. And it's like, okay, so obviously the plot stems from the fact that this girl has been a piece of shit in ways we don't really learn about, if I remember correctly. They just keep saying, oh, she does such bad things, we're going to have to send her away. And that's all we know. Okay. So, if they went beyond that, I honestly don't remember. So, going on that, this is basically going to be when the shit starts to go down. Now, is this character supposed to be like the sympathetic character that we're going to, like, pity? It's like, are we supposed to, you know, feel bad for this fucking baby of a person? Well, and the fact that it's hard to tell is a problem in itself, because this movie's actually going to try and get... this movie's kind of trying to have it both ways, and that's where it gets off, because it's trying to do this, like, 80s slasher thing, and you can tell because we are bombarded endlessly with fucking 80s songs for a reason, once again, I'm not really sure of. Because we're doing this whole thing where it's like, I guess it's used as like a taunting method or something. They drive around in their damn truck and they just blare 80s songs and just leave the truck there. And it's like, oh, spooky, I guess? Because I don't know what the fuck is up with this music thing, because the only thing we had to go on in the first movie, if I remember correctly, which it's been a while since I saw, which is now a decade old this year, is the skipping record player with that Quicksilver Girl song or whatever it was. And it's like, that song was kind of creepy in itself. And more so afterwards when they altered it by making it skip on the record player like that. It's like, that felt very taunting and weird and unsettling, and you knew something was lurking in the darkness and all that. So what the fuck is this sudden 80s bullshit? And it's constant. Fucking constant. More so, I think, than a fucking Guardians of the Galaxy movie. This movie's damn soundtrack. And if it's supposed to kind of have some horror-type impact, I don't know where they're getting that from, because it really does not work at all. Or if it's supposed to add a little something to the scenes or whatever. But point being, they're trying to be some 80s slasher movie. But at the same time, they're also like... Oh, they're like basically trying to be all realistic about it, too. Because it's one of those movies where they attempt, like... they basically attempt to throw in emotion. Like, when somebody... Obviously, it's a very close-knit family of 4. they all, like, fucking hate each other, but they're obviously, you know, they're close because they're a family of four that live in the same house. So when things happen to one or the other or whatever, they're going to try and elicit, like, real emotion in this, which is admirable to an extent because there's that whole thing in horror movies similar to this, especially in the past. That whole thing where these people are supposed to be really, really close, or usually they're, like, really close friends or something, and then, like, you know, 4 or 5 of them get brutally murdered or whatever and witnessed by the others, and it's like, watching those movies, you kind of think, man, if this were real life, they'd be, like, so bent out of shape. Those are, like, their best friends. What? So when they actually show when people react, you know, like, as if it's a huge tragedy because this is somebody they knew and loved, you want to commend it, but then it's like, your tones are not going together here. And it's like, there probably is an effective way to do this. I'm sure it's been done. I've probably mentioned it if I could remember off the top of my head. But this is not it. This is not it. Because... And because also it wants to do that, but it also kind of wants to do the... going into... What's the word I'm looking for? They want to go into, like, movie dialogue after they've tried to have a real moment. Like take away the tragedy thing, like when they're after they've been injured and he's like, the brother's, like, tending to her wounds, and they have this conversation that you can just tell the writers are saying, like, oh, this is gonna feel really real and authentic, this is a brother and sister moment for real. But then, like, 30 seconds later, he's spouting off movie dialogue, like, you know, like, the whole... I think half this movie's script has to be people screaming, leave us alone, or other cliches like that. And we just go right back into that as if we're in some 80s slasher movie again, with all the cliches right around every single corner that we already know. And you're really pushing out of balance this realism thing you want to throw into this for some reason. And yeah, this is one where you kind of had to go with, like, one or the other. Because it's also one of those cases of... I understand, you can kind of get it in the first movie because they're so caught off guard, because they haven't really witnessed anything except the whole, you know, coming to the door and asking for Tamara or whatever and then leaving, which is a little eerie, but then that's it. Before the shit really goes down in this movie, they've already found 2 rotting corpses that have been, like, mutilated. So they're not exactly caught off guard when they come face to face with a killer. Unlike, you know, Liv Tyler was. So the problem here, as I almost fall out of this chair, is the fact that this is one of those cases where you only want to go so far in the what's believable and what isn't. But like I said, where this movie seems to be struggling with a balance for that, this will be a movie where you notice, why can they not just tackle these people? It feels very unbelievable that if they know the shit that they're in, if they're not in survival instinct mode, you know? Like I said, with Liv Tyler, they were able to catch off guard because she didn't realize what she was in for. She was just at home doing nothing. But here, they've already found a corpse. They're already in survival mode. One of them may or may not already be dead. So what happens here when somebody walks in, unarmed by the way, just wearing a mask? She just freezes and stares and, like, babbles like she's so scared she doesn't know what to do. Now, I get it to an extent if that would be your reaction to something horrific. But the trouble is these words I can't get away from. Survival instinct should be in by now. So when this person's not doing anything but standing there wearing a mask, surely you're gonna pick something up. You're going to, if you don't feel like they can hurt you, this is a tiny girl wearing a mask. Just fucking run at her. Just do something. But while you're standing there babbling, she seemingly blindingly opens a drawer, finds a knife, and then comes at them. There was such an open window here. But it's like, this girl is like the same size as her. She's supposed to be like a teenager or something. But she stands there and waits for this girl to pull a knife out of the drawer. This drawer that she's in their house. They should know I know they just got here and shit. We don't know how long they've been lurking around, but I mean, still, you had time, okay? and her, slapping the knife against the table is not going to be scary to anybody when all you can do is sit there and say, why didn't you use that open window? This could be over so much quicker than it actually is. And they kind of try to do that in the last 20 minutes or so. Like, kind of show how easy this should fucking be. But, no, it takes its sweet-ass time to get there because other things have to be scary, I guess. So, yeah, now, there's also, oh, shit, what else was I gonna say? There's also the whole, another problem here is the whole, there's a lot of other movies in this. Sorry, I lost what I was saying for a second. But the thing here is, I get homage, okay, especially if you're trying to do a certain era here and say, hey, look, remember this era, we're trying to invoke that. Despite the fact that the first movie was, like, it was in a totally different world or something. I don't know. But, the thing here is that we have at least, from what I can recall, at least 3 scenes that feel directly lifted from other movies. There is an ending scene that feels lifted directly from Texas Chainsaw. There is a scene in a car that feels directly lifted from Scream. And there's a scene in a bathroom that feels directly lifted from The Shining. And, like I said, watching these scenes play out and the way they just kind of go throughout the movie, this does not feel like homage. This feels like laziness and, hey, if you like this in this movie, maybe you'll like it in this one, because we only have about an hour and 20-minute runtime. We have nothing to work with. I mean, we had a fucking decade to come up with this shit, but apparently we had no ideas by the time we got to this stage. So, you have a really short runtime, and very familiar scenes, and a whole lot of cliche shit. Like the whole, oh, no, it's all my fault, and the, no, don't you say that kind of dialogue. Yeah, that's what it took them 10 years to write. So, great. We have all that stuff to look forward to. And every now and then, there is something that kind of, I mean, here at least they try to explain, like, there's the whole convenience of, oh, everybody leaves the trailer park on Labor Day or something, so it's, like, abandoned, so they feel helpless or whatever. Then there's the stuff like, something they do bring over from the last movie is the total lack of score. Which is fine, only problem is it was much more effective in the first movie because the first movie wasn't constantly blasting an 80s soundtrack at us for no fucking reason. And even the kill scenes feel really uninspired and abrupt. And like, yeah, somebody ends up getting themselves killed because they're driving, and the next minute they've crashed into a trailer. It's like hardly provoked. A little provoked, but hardly. And that's where the horror comes from. And that's, yeah, it doesn't work at all. And I'm obviously saying this as, I didn't fall in love with the first movie, but I like it pretty well. I don't like it as much as I did when it first came out, but it's fine. Totally. But this one, I don't know what this one was doing. I had heard some positive word from people who are into the genre. I guess I can get it if you're like, I mean, yeah, sometimes I look forward to movies like this. Like, I was talking about a lot lately that with all the paranormal movies and all that other stuff being, like, constant, it's always kind of nice when you see somebody try to just bring back the slasher movie, where there's nothing paranormal about it, there's nothing too overcomplicated. It's just literally a dude with a weapon that you have to stop, or 3 in this case. But this is just, this is in one of those cases, one of the many cases where it doesn't work, and it's being that simple is also kind of, it's, like I said, it's so simple to the fact that it hardly feels like they have an idea at all. So that's, yeah, it's weird to me that, I remember hearing about the fact there was going to be a sequel to The Strangers for, like, so long. Like, I feel like I heard that, like, every other year this entire past decade since the first one came out. And it seemed it seemed like a pointless idea then. It seems like an even more pointless idea seeing what it ended up being. So that's... Yeah, this was not working for me. And movies like this have worked for me in the past that are just this, but no, it's too many things that don't work, and a lot of things that are in here for no reason, seemingly trying to amplify their surroundings, but it doesn't work. Speaking of, the last one is Deep Blue Sea 2. You know, we're all waiting 19 years since 1999 when Deep Blue Sea came out for a straight-to-video sequel. I mean, we were just dying for this. So, I'm not going to pretend that the first movie is some masterpiece, because you've got it was really cheesy, it's got terrible CGI, and it was basically a big expensive B movie. But it was also memorable, it felt self-aware, and it subverted cliches. So, like the whole Samuel L. Jackson thing, the killing Saffron Burrows at the very last minute thing, stuff like that makes that movie stand out. And this is pretty much exactly what you expect it to be, being a straight-to-video sequel to a movie that was a hit 19 years ago. So, we're doing the whole thing now where, speaking of the first one, I'm not really sure where the first one lies here, because when they're explaining the sharks to us, she's trying to tell us that they're not like, you know, the hungry eating machines that the movies play off. And it's like, this is not how they are not how Hollywood portrays them. So it's like, wait a minute, is she talking about Deep Blue Sea? So is it like... So, does this sequel to Deep Blue Sea, in a world where, like, Deep Blue Sea did not actually happen in real life, but we never... That's not near as meta as it sounds. That's all they go into that with, is sharks are not the way Hollywood portrays them, and they just leave it at that. So, if that was their attempt at something like that, pitiful. Straight to video quality, if you will. So obviously she ends up on an island and they're doing the same old thing where they're like, hey, we're gonna, you know, maybe solve, you know, we're gonna get cures for these human diseases and all that, but our test subjects are big giant sharks and shit. And they're gonna get really, really smart and then do all that. And they talk about, our villain here has a self-proclaimed flair for the dramatic, so we know how that's going to go for the rest of the movie. And you've got this woman constantly telling him how evil he is, now he's got a god complex and all that. It's like, you know it's going to be one of those villains that the movie really wants us to believe is evil, because all the other characters are going to keep telling us how evil he is, even though he's just a fucking dude that did this, and then he just kind of stands around and doesn't do a whole lot. And so we go on that, and we meet this crew, this totally, completely unmemorable crew. I can't tell you a single one of their names, their traits, their jobs. I got nothing for you. I vaguely remember some faces, mostly because some of them were chewed off. But the thing here is that what's funny about this is that with the crew and like the locations, the interiors mainly, it felt like, and kind of being on this island, it felt like the same kind of, like a low-rent version of the crew and the locations from Mindhunters, which is really funny because Mindhunters was directed by Rennie Harlin, who did the first Deep Blue Sea. I don't know if that's intentional, I'm sure it's not. So we go on, and I talked about the fact that Deep Blue Sea is a movie that felt self-aware, felt like it knew it was a B movie, and just went all over the top and crazy and shit, with all of its bad CGI and all that other stuff. So it's like, but this one, I don't really get that vibe from. I don't know if it would have helped if they had it anyway. There's already another fucking series with sharks in it that thinks it's being self-aware when it's significantly dumber than it thinks it is, and more pointless than it thinks it is. Like here we have, like, okay, you go back to the scene in the first movie when Saffron Burrows has to take off her wetsuit, and she's wearing just the bathing suit underneath. And you think, oh, that's definitely a studio move, and it's definitely, like, the reason despite, you know, LL Cool J and Thomas Jane and all them, she's the one that's on the poster with cleavage showing. So it's like a definite studio move that she has to take her wetsuit off in the middle of an action scene. But weirdly enough, still, even if that was the case, it actually had purpose. The way the rubber protected her from the electric and shit. This is a movie that is so shameless about that kind of stuff, where it's like, he's like, okay, so now that y'all are here, y'all need to go change into your wetsuits and all that stuff. So we see the woman go in, we see her strip down, and the scene ends. Not even her changing clothes, her stripping down is its own scene. And once again, you may think this is a self-aware thing, but it's like, not, because even if to be self-aware, number one, you'd have to be semi-clever. You'd have to be somewhat close to being clever. And this is not that, and I will tell you why. Because there is a next scene where it's like, okay, now if this movie was self-aware, this would be the scene we really found out. And they dropped the ball so fucking hard. They attempt this scene when, obviously, the sharks are getting smarter. So the bad guy is talking to another guy about what the fate of the sharks is going to be. He's like, yeah, we're going to do this, we're going to test them, we're going to do all this stuff, we're going to put them in all these environments, we're going to put all this shit in them or whatever. And it's like, and then what are we going to do when we're done with them? We're just going to kill them. We're just going to fuck them all up. We're going to kill them all. And we pan over, and there is a small window here where the tank is, where the sharks are in it. And there's a shark peeking through this window, watching him and listening to him. And it's like, okay, so here's the problem, is that in a self-aware movie, number one, you're being tongue-in-cheek. You're not being laugh-out-loud funny like this is. This is pure stupidity. This is them trying to have a 2001 moment. This is their version of the scene in 2001 when we realize Hal can read lips. I think this is what they're trying to pull off with this scene where the shark's fucking peeking in through the window at him and watching him. So that is where I feel like it just completely cut off and was like, no, this is not self-aware. This is full-on, pure, unadulterated, 150% stupidity. And this is the direction we're going to go now. So, with that in mind, the rest of the movie happened, and honestly, it probably would have been a lot more entertaining if the movie kept being that stupid. But the problem is that the rest of the movie is just people swimming around in hallways and possibly getting eaten. And there's nothing to it. There's no suspense. There's no creativity to the kills. There's no, like, big predicaments or whatever. There's not, like, big scenes that, like, build up to an ultimate kill or whatever. No, it is just endless scene after endless scene of people swimming down flooded hallways. And they try to invoke some kind of, I don't know if it's artistry into this, because it's like every room has like a different colored light bulbs. So like one scene will be entirely red, one scene will be entirely green, one scene will be entirely blue. This doesn't really represent anything or isn't symbolic for anything. I guess it's just to make the scenes look different. Maybe it made the editor's job easier. It was like color-coding the scenes for the editor or something. It feels pathetic. And it's also moments where, like, there's, like, no big thrilling moments. There's no, like, big scares. This is one of those movies where those moments come when, like, somebody kind of sneaks up on the bad guy a little bit. Or not even sneaks up on him, just walks into a room and says, hey. I think the hey thing is supposed to be like a jump scare moment, but the funny thing is that she walks in and she says hey, but it's not she says hey and it's accompanied with the jump scare sound. Him turning to look at her after she's already said hey is when they put the jump scare sound in. So that's the kind of movie we're dealing with. Like I said, even just describing it may sound self-aware. This shit is not. It is not near smart enough to know that what it's doing is fucking idiotic. So, and it's like I said, it just really goes into that whole... every now and then you can feel them trying to cash in on another scene from the other movie, like the Samuel Jackson scene, the "we gotta stick together," all that other stuff. Him trying to do the big speech and then just getting devoured. Their version of that in this is a guy getting out of the water who seems to be okay. And then he says, "These sharks can kiss my ass," and then wouldn't you know it? So that's their version of the Samuel Jackson scene, I guess, in this. So yeah, I mean, I guess there's one moment that's a little effective when they're all like in a line and they go to they pull each other out and then they go to pull the other guy out and he's like half gone, and it's like that might get you for like half a second, and then it's like, okay, that's like the most effective they are, and it's something that lasts like half a second in this hour and a half movie. And even then, it's just like, it's not like it's anything we haven't seen before. And the not the 2010 Piranha movie with Elizabeth Shue, but that movie straight to video sequel. That movie straight to VOD sequel, excuse me, is kind of the territory we're in. Only once again, even that movie was self-aware, and you could tell this. It's no. And when it kind of goes into that whole thing where we're trying to build up the villain to be like the whole... It's like we're back in the Shape of Water territory. The who are the monsters? The humans, the ones that made them? Oh, it could be. And it's ridiculous. And it's ultimately pointless, especially once we get to this really just laughably idiotic anticlimax. It's like the big, this is no Roy Scheider shooting a barrel kind of ending. This is just... It's like, I feel like they just gave up. I feel like they gave up before the cameras even started rolling on this. But weirdly enough, there is worse. But it's, yeah. Like I said, it didn't even try to like go beyond, the whole stupidity angle. It was just played it so straight that they... And like I said, after seeing the shark peek through the window, that's disappointing. Like, you really anticipate some really fucking dumb shit, but it's dumb in all the wrong ways and all the boring ways. So that's a bummer. So, yeah. Shock, surprise, sequel weekend wasn't all that successful. So, that's what we have here. But, speaking of sequels, we finally have Avengers next week. So, we'll see how that goes. And you'll be getting a Versus shortly after this, a requested one, and all that. I think I know what the next Versus is going to be too, but we'll get to that when the time comes. So there's not really much else to say. That's what this weekend was. So until that other stuff, I think we're done.